The scandal which has seen people who've lived here for decades lose their jobs, their houses and even their right to live in the country has been described as appalling by the Home Secretary herself. But Labour say that is not good enough. Jeremy Corbyn says there's something rotten at the heart of government. His political neighbour is the Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry, who came in to speak to me a little earlier this morning.
I think in many ways we're quite old-fashioned. We think that if you're a politician in charge of a department and a department does its job as badly as the Home Office has clearly been doing, then you should resign. That's the way it always used to be. And how much worse can it get? So people have died, people have lost their jobs, they have lost their futures, and people working in the National Health Service all their lives, suddenly they lose their jobs, they're not entitled to even go to the National Health Service. I mean, it could not be worse, and yet the Home Secretary thinks, I can apologise and it'll be all right. Well, it won't be.
Amber Rudd must quit.
I really think she should quit.
Now, is that because you're saying, as Jeremy Corbyn did yesterday, that this was deliberate policy by ministers? And in which case, what is the evidence it was deliberate?
OK, so the evidence is, it comes in layers. The first one is that they decided that they had to cut back on immigration to tens of thousands. That's what they said. Now, clearly they can't control and they couldn't control EU migration. So what they had to do was for everybody that wasn't an EU migrant, they had to make it as difficult as possible for them to be able to come into the country or to stay in the country. So that was deliberate. They then talked about having a hostile environment. And that culture is really important. You instill that into the Home Office and you can make all the difference in terms of what the officials think that their job is. You send go-home vans around the place. This was a deliberate policy to make life difficult. And then the icing on the cake was that when they passed the new legislation, which was the legislation where landlords and employers had to check to see whether someone was an illegal immigrant, they consciously took out of the legislation protection for Commonwealth citizens.
But when you say deliberate, are you suggesting that ministers wanted people in the so-called Windrush generation, people who came here as kids from the Caribbean, they wanted to send them home? Is that what you're claiming?
I'm not saying that.
So in that sense, it wasn't deliberate?
No. What was deliberate was the hostile environment. What was deliberate was we need to make life hard for migrants.
Yeah. Who first used that phrase?
We are going deliberately for illegal migrants, but if caught up in the wash, legal migrants suffer. Actually, we're quite reckless about that and we don't really care.
But you see, twice you've used the phrase hostile environment. It's been used all week. Who first used it? Alan
Johnson first used it in a speech.
First used by Labour.
But in
government, I'll quote it to you if you like, was used by the UK Border Agency in February 2010. We are making the UK a hostile environment for those that break our rules.
Yes.
Under Labour.
Yes. And so it's right that we should have rules, and it's right that they should be enforced, and that it should be done fairly, and it should be done fast, and it should be firm. I have no problem with that.
Do you have a problem with the words that were used by the Labour Party in government?
But to lift that phrasing and to embed it as much as it was, and to strengthen it, and to make it so much sharper and nastier, that was the difference.
But you're talking about tone, aren't you? Are you saying that you don't want to see checks when people arrive in hospital for treatment that might cost tens of thousands of pounds? You don't want to see whether they're in fact illegal immigrants. Are you saying you don't want to see checks when people rent a house or get a job, even if they're taking that house and that job from someone who's legally here?
No, I don't have a problem.
All of that.
I don't have a problem with checks being made, as I said earlier. But the step up that was made under Theresa May was to say we need to get migration down to tens of thousands and we have to be hostile. And the lead that is taken by the Home Secretary and by other ministers in their department will make all the difference, because there's lots of discretion that is exercised. But I mean, this is an important point. So, for example, I wrote to the Home Secretary some 3 or 4 years before about a guy who'd lived here for decades, and I said, look, suddenly he's not allowed to work. This is ridiculous. He's obviously British, and they wouldn't exercise their discretion, and we had to go to court.
But we've just established
that was somebody who was from the Commonwealth.
Hostile environment was established under the
words are
Labour
used,
government.
but the culture was not. You know?
When the new measures were brought in, that you say was brought in with the wrong culture, the Shadow Home Secretary, Labour's spokesman at the time, Yvette Cooper, said, this is sensible enough in principle.
Yes.
You abstained when there was a vote on these changes.
Yes.
So you're now
because
being
there were-
wise after the
No. Because there were, as I say, they didn't consult on it's taking out of this section. They took this protection out, which is a protection for Commonwealth citizens. They took that out. And if they hadn't, and, you know, if you look at, I think it was an impact assessment, which I've frankly been shown recently, that shows they knew. They knew that if they took out that protection, there would be an impact on the Windrush generation. So, you know, they knew that they were putting them at risk.
Do you think ministers are racist, or that they've implemented a racist policy?
I don't like to bandy around these things. I would rather just stick to the evidence. The evidence was
Jeremy
that
Corbyn quoted someone as saying this is racist, and you normally quote people because you agree with them. He said there's something rotten at the heart of government.
Well,
so
I
I think it's incumbent on you to be clear or not. Are you saying
I'm happy to
these
say that
policies
there
are
is
racist?
something rotten at the heart of government. I think that the idea of cutting back immigration to tens of thousands when you know you have no control over one of the major drivers, and so therefore you need to be enforcing rules and being fundamentally unfair on those from outside the European Union, that is wrong and that is rotten.
Is it racist?
It's unfair.
When I describe